Beneath the surface of the Canadian Rockies and the rainforests of Vancouver Island, there are thousands of caves, and some of them are among the most dangerous and least forgiving places in the country. In this video, we are going to go over 3 incidents that happened deep inside Canadian caves. One is a survival story that was captured entirely on helmet camera. Another is a tragedy that triggered the largest cave rescue operation in Canadian history. And the third is the ongoing saga of a cave so hostile, it has nearly killed some of the most experienced explorers who ever tried to push it deeper. Before we get into the caves themselves, it helps to understand what makes caving in Canada so uniquely dangerous compared to the rest of the world. In warmer countries, the biggest threats inside a cave are usually getting lost, falling, or running out of light. In Canada, all of those risks still apply, but there is one additional factor that changes everything, and that factor is cold. Water temperatures inside Canadian caves hover around 3 to 4 degrees Celsius year-round. That is cold enough to begin shutting down the human body within minutes of exposure. On top of that, many of the country's most significant caves are located in remote alpine terrain, often hours or even days from the nearest road. If something goes wrong underground in a place like the Canadian Rockies, rescue teams do not arrive in minutes. They arrive in days. And if you are wet, injured, and stuck in near freezing water deep underground, waiting days for help may not be survivable. That is why cave accidents in Western Canada are so hard to survive. The caving community is tiny, fewer than 250 active cavers in all of Western Canada. The rescue teams are specialized volunteer teams, and when something goes wrong, help is coming from very far away. But even experienced cavers can find themselves in situations where the cave decides it has had enough. Cascade Cave sits on Vancouver Island, roughly 80 miles northwest of the small town of Duncan, British Columbia. From the outside, there is almost nothing to see. The entrance is a locked metal hatch sunk into the forest floor, and to access it, you need to sign a waiver and obtain a key. But beneath that hatch is a cave system that runs approximately 1.5 kilometers long and drops over 100 meters deep. It features underground waterfalls, tight squeezes, and chambers carved out of limestone by centuries of rainwater. 2 parts of the cave matter here. The first is a drop called Double Trouble, which is a 50-foot rappel where a jutting rock formation splits a waterfall in 2. The second, and far more dangerous, is a passage known as Bastard's Crawl. This is a 20-foot hourglass-shaped squeeze where 4 separate underground streams converge into a single roaring channel of water. In dry conditions, it is manageable. In wet conditions, it can become a death trap. On December 5, 2015 at 6 o'clock in the morning, 6 men entered Cascade Cave. The group's most experienced member was a 33-year-old paramedic from Duncan named Andrew Munoz. Andrew had been caving for years and knew Cascade well. Alongside him was a 43-year-old Jason Story, a window washing business owner who was relatively new to caving. The other 4 members of the group were Adam Shepard, a paramedic, Zach Zariski, a chef and volunteer firefighter, and 2 others named Matt Watson and Arthur Taylor. Andrew was wearing a helmet camera that would end up recording everything that happened over the next 18 hours. The group descended past Double Trouble and spent several hours exploring the deeper sections of the cave. Everything was going smoothly. But what none of them could see from underground was that heavy rain had begun hammering the surface above them. Vancouver Island is one of the wettest places in North America. And when it rains hard, surface water does not take long to find its way into the cave system. Underground streams that were manageable on the way in can become torrents on the way out. When the group turned around and began heading back toward the surface, they reached Bastard's Crawl. Jason was at the front. As he began to work his way through the tight passage, He turned to ask Andrew which direction to go. That tiny shift was all it took. The current caught him and rammed him into the choke point. As Andrew later described it, Jason was pulled in like a cork into a bottle. Water poured over him, rising to his ears. For several agonizing minutes, Andrew worked to free Jason's leg, which had become trapped in the rock. He finally got a rope around Jason's boot and yanked him free. But by then, it was too late to escape. The rising water had made Bastard's crawl completely impassable. There was simply too much water moving too fast through too narrow a space. Andrew realized there was only one move left. He sent the other 4 men ahead to squeeze through the crawl before it got any worse, and told them to call for help the moment they reached the surface. He and Jason would stay behind and wait for rescue. The 4 men made it through, but just barely. Andrew and Jason were now trapped approximately 200 feet underground on a small rocky ledge about 6 feet by 10 feet in size, angled at 45 degrees. Below them was the top of the 4-story Double Trouble waterfall. One wrong move and they would slide off the ledge and fall to their deaths. The sound of the water was deafening. It echoed off every wall and made it nearly impossible to think, let alone communicate. Jason was already in first-stage hypothermia. Andrew, drawing on his paramedic training, recognized the most dangerous sign almost immediately. Jason had stopped shivering. When a person stops shivering, it does not mean they are warming up. It means the body is losing its fight against the cold and is beginning to shut down. Andrew lit a small pocket stove and heated water, then carefully poured the warm water into Jason's calving suit to try to bring his core temperature back up. He wrapped him in a Mylar emergency blanket, and then he did the only other thing he could do. He waited. The helmet camera caught the whole thing, the darkness, the roar of the water, the 2 of them pinned on a slick ledge with nowhere to go. Andrew later described what it felt like in an interview. He said you feel multiple emotions simultaneously. It is dark, cold, and incredibly loud. And after a while, you start to experience delusions and see faces in the dark. At one point during the night, he considered recording a goodbye message to his infant daughter, but he decided against it. To him, recording that message would have been an admission that he had given up, and he was not ready to do that. Around 9 o'clock that evening, the 4 men who had made it out reached the surface and raised the alarm. Within hours, approximately 50 rescuers were mobilized. They came from the British Columbia and Alberta Cave Rescue Service, the RCMP, British Columbia Ambulance, and the Alberni Valley Rescue Squad. Rescuers entered the cave and began working their way toward Andrew and Jason, but the water's ferocity forced them to retreat. At one point, they got within 25 feet of the 2 trapped men, but they physically could not pass through the flooded crawl. They left their rescue equipment behind in the cave and pulled back to the surface. There was nothing more they could do until the water went down. Andrew and Jason clung to their ledge through the night, checking on each other every 20 minutes. They'd doze off and then jerk awake, terrified that one of them might have slipped. Andrew later said that being trapped in that cave felt more remote than being on Mount Everest. He said you might as well be on the moon. Then around 5 o'clock in the morning on December 6th, Andrew noticed something. The water was beginning to subside. Slowly, inch by inch, the level was dropping. By 6:30, there was just enough clearance between the water and the cave ceiling to attempt an escape. Andrew estimated it was about 3.5 to 4 inches of airspace. That was it. If either of them got stuck again, there was no one on the other side to help them. Jason was in terrible shape. His legs barely worked, and Andrew had to physically lift them for him as they moved through the flooded passage. Andrew could hear Jason screaming out in pain as he hauled his body up, step by step. On their way out, they passed through the section of cave where the rescue team had abandoned their equipment the night before. Andrew described it as surreal, almost ghostly, seeing ropes and gear left behind in the dark by people who had been forced to give up. 18 hours after they entered Cascade Cave, Andrew and Jason surfaced. Rescuers rushed to them with Tim Hortons coffee and Timbits. But the rescuers had also brought something else with them. They had brought bone saws. They had fully expected to be recovering bodies. Both men survived. Andrew underwent counseling for post-traumatic stress and waited 6 weeks before watching his own helmet camera footage. Eventually, both men returned to Cascade Cave, roughly a year after the incident. Andrew's footage is now used to train first responders across Canada, and the story was later featured in a Reader's Digest article titled "No Way Out," and in a documentary short called "Caving in Cascade: A Story of Survival." On October 17, 1991, 4 cavers were climbing out of Arctomys Cave when a rope shifted, a boulder broke loose, and one of the most experienced men in the group was crushed deep underground. Arctomys Cave lies inside Trio Mountain, high above the Moose River Valley in Mount Robson Provincial Park, British Columbia. The cave was first discovered in 1911 by mountaineer G.R.B. Kinney, and over the decades that followed, it became known as one of the most significant caves in Canada. It has 3,496 meters of surveyed passages and plunges 536 meters deep, which for many years made it the deepest known cave in the country. But depth was not the worst part. Distance was. The cave entrance sits roughly 20 kilometers up the Moose River Valley, high in the Alpine, approximately 80 kilometers west of Jasper. Just getting to the entrance requires a long backcountry approach through wilderness with no roads and no infrastructure. Rick Black was an experienced caver and a seasonal park ranger at Mount Robson Provincial Park. He knew these mountains better than most, and he had been inside Arctomys before. On the day of the accident, Rick was ascending from the 450-meter level of the cave along with 3 companions. One was Chris Zimmerman, also a seasonal ranger at Mount Robson. The other 2 were Hugo Mulick and Ron Lassell. The group was climbing back toward the surface using a hand line, a fixed rope used to assist movement in vertical or near-vertical sections of a cave. As they made their way upward, the rope dislodged a massive boulder. The boulder struck Rick and drove him down to the water-covered floor of the cave. His companions immediately began trying to move him toward the entrance, but Rick soon said something that made it clear just how serious the situation was. He said simply, "I can't travel." He had sustained a broken pelvis and massive internal injuries. An autopsy conducted afterward would confirm that no rescue effort, no matter how fast it arrived, could have saved him. The injuries were unsurvivable. Rick Blake died of his injuries while still deep underground inside Arctomys Cave. What followed became the biggest cave recovery effort Canada had ever seen. But by the time it got underway, it was no longer a rescue. It was a recovery. Dozens of rescuers and cavers were called in from across the country, from Victoria, Calgary, and various caving associations. Park wardens were among the first responders, but as one of them, a man named Al McDonald, later pointed out, park wardens are not cavers. Specialized help was required. A massive camp was erected above the tiny cave entrance, and Al later described the surreal scene of a sprawling operation built around what was essentially a small hole in the ground. He described his shift going into the cave as an 8-hour ordeal, down climbing through the incredible cave system until they finally reached Rick's body. Recovery teams worked in relay shifts through the deep, cold vertical passages to bring him back to the surface. In the years that followed, a memorial fund was established in Rick's name by the British Columbia Speleological Federation to fund cave rescue training across the province. Later, fellow cavers honored him in the way cavers do, by tying his name permanently to the underground world he loved. To this day, Rick Blake's death remains the most significant caving fatality in Canadian history, and a reminder that even people who know these caves better than anyone can be killed by them in an instant. Castleguard Cave is located at the northern end of Banff National Park in Alberta, directly beneath Castleguard Mountain and the Columbia Icefield. It is Canada's longest known single-entrance cave, stretching more than 21 kilometers beneath the Columbia Icefield, and it extends 388 meters deep. Today, it is closed to the general public, which tells you a lot about what kind of place this is. It has a single entrance and a single exit, and they are the same opening. A round trip to the farthest reaches of the cave takes 4 to 5 days underground, with 2 separate underground camps. The cave is at least 700,000 years old, and at its deepest point, a caver is separated from the surface by 234 meters of solid rock and glacier ice. Getting deep into Castleguard means moving through a cave that keeps changing its rules. First come the narrow rifts, where cavers have to brace themselves across the walls just to keep moving forward over deep drops with no rope. Then come the long, water-carved tunnels, and beyond those is the real barrier, Boone's Sump. Boone's Sump is a flooded tunnel nearly 845 meters long. To pass through it, a caver must be a fully trained cave diver, carrying specialized equipment, and the transit takes over 70 minutes of underwater swimming in complete darkness through frigid water. On the other side of the sump, a diver surfaces alone in passages that no human being has ever seen from the land above. One caver described it as being on another planet, and from there the cave continues even further, eventually terminating at a feature called the Ice Plug, where actual glacier ice intrudes directly into the limestone passages. It is the only cave currently known beneath glacial ice, or an ice field in the world. The cave floods with what has been described as catastrophic rapidity during summer glacier melt. Because of this, all expeditions are now restricted to mid to late winter. But that restriction exists only because of what happened to the first people who tried to explore it during the summer. In the late 1960s, 2 pioneering cavers named Mike Boone and Peter Thompson pushed an unprecedented 10 kilometers underground through the fissures and into territory that no human being had ever seen. They were part of an expedition led by Dr. Derek Ford of McMaster University, who had been studying the cave since its discovery. When Boone and Thompson turned back toward the entrance, they discovered that their exit route had flooded with glacial meltwater. They were trapped deep underground with no way out. They did the only thing they could do. They found a flat, sandy area in the cave, dug out a small bed in the sand, and turned off their lights to conserve fuel. Then they waited, in absolute darkness, in near freezing temperatures, with no idea if anyone was coming for them or if the water would ever go down. On the surface, Dr. Ford recognized that something had gone wrong when the 2 men failed to return on schedule. He organized a party of 3 rescuers and sent them into the cave. After hours of uncertainty, the floodwaters partially receded, revealing a small airspace near the ceiling. Boone and Thompson escaped by crawling through frigid water beneath the rock, their faces pressed against the cave ceiling to breathe. If the water had been only a few inches higher, they probably would not have come out. This incident permanently changed all future exploration of Castleguard. Every expedition since has been restricted to mid to late winter when the glacier above is frozen solid and meltwater cannot enter the cave. John Pollock of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society later called the Boone and Thompson expedition one of the top feats in Canadian exploration history. But even with the timing issue solved, Castleguard continued to try to kill the people who entered it. In April of 1987, a diver was attempting to pass through Boone's Sump when his rebuilt Poseidon 300 regulator catastrophically failed at approximately 90 feet of depth. He inhaled 100% water through his mouthpiece. He attempted a second shallow breath and got water again. He was on the verge of a fatal choking cough with water filling his esophagus when he made the out-of-air signal and reached his dive partner, who provided a backup regulator. He survived only because his partner happened to have that backup equipment readily available. Without it, he would have died at 90 feet in a flooded tunnel, days from the nearest road, inside a cave that no conventional rescue team could have reached. Then in April of 2010, a 39-year-old veteran cave diver from Wales named Martin Groves made the most significant cave diving effort in Canadian history. After a 70-minute dive through 845 meters of Boone's Sump, he surfaced alone in a chamber that no human being had ever seen. But his equipment was failing. His right-hand dry glove had malfunctioned, leaving his hand numb and useless. One of his 2 oxygen meters was giving erratic readings, which on a closed-circuit rebreather, the system keeping him alive, was a potentially fatal problem. Groves stood there, alone, beyond an 845-meter underwater barrier, and considered his options. Rescue from where he was standing was, in his own words, all but impossible. He thought about removing his dry suit to explore further, but realized that a damaged zipper or gasket in 4-degree water could kill him before he could get back through the sump. Groves realized the cave had already made the decision for him. He was turning back. That expedition had required 7 British cavers and 20 members of the Alberta Speleological Society hauling heavy diving gear up the Saskatchewan Glacier just to get the equipment to the cave entrance. All of that effort, all of those months of planning, and the exploration beyond the sump lasted less than an hour before the cave forced Groves to retreat. And somehow, that still was not the end of it. In March of 2020, an expedition organized by Katie Graham of the Alberta Speleological Society brought in some of the most experienced cave divers on Earth. Among them were Dr. Richard Harris and Craig Challen, the 2 Australian divers who had become internationally famous for their role in the 2018 Thai cave rescue. Also on the team was New Zealander Tom Crisp. Days before the dive team arrived at Castleguard, the advanced support crew sent back a desperate message. The ice crawls near the cave entrance had shrunk to roughly 20 centimeters of airspace. Not everyone could fit through. The expedition was in danger of being called off before it even started. The expedition leader, Christian Stenner, scrambled to hardware stores in Canmore and bought 18-volt chainsaw batteries. He then brought a chainsaw into the cave and used it to cut a channel through the ice, reopening the route. The team spent 11 days underground. And when they finally emerged from the cave, blinking in the daylight, the world outside had transformed. COVID-19 lockdowns had begun while they were underground. They went into the cave in one world and came out in another. And that points to a bigger problem, because what is happening at Castleguard right now is something that affects all of these caves. Climate change is reshaping the underground landscape of the Canadian Rockies. At Castleguard specifically, ice blockages near the entrance have made the cave inaccessible multiple times in the past decade. The Columbia Icefield above the cave is retreating, and as it does, meltwater patterns are becoming less predictable. Passages that were reliably open during winter expeditions a decade ago may not be open the next time someone tries. There is a real possibility that within our lifetimes, Castleguard Cave will become permanently sealed, locking away one of the most extraordinary natural features on the continent. And yet people keep going back. Despite the flooding, the equipment failures, the rock falls, the cold, and the isolation, a small community of Canadian cavers continues to push deeper into these systems every chance they get. Vancouver Island alone has over 1,000 recorded caves, the highest concentration in North America. British Columbia's 7 deepest caves all lie within the province. Canada's deepest known cave, Bisaro Anima near Fernie, British Columbia, discovered in 2012, plunges more than 670 meters into the earth. The pattern in all 3 stories is the same. In Canadian caves, small mistakes do not stay small. Cold, water, distance, and bad timing turn ordinary problems into death sentences fast. Munoz and Story made it out. Rick Blake did not. Castleguard is still waiting for the next team that thinks it is ready. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.